welcome you guys back to another episode of Pistons Talk Podcast presented by FanDuel. In today's episode, what we'll be discussing is something that I've actually never done on this YouTube channel or this podcast for that matter. I am going to be landscaping all 29 NBA teams and picking out one trade target for the Detroit Pistons. This is a fun little exercise with it being NBA trade season. I have given myself 3 rules that I have to follow, and I'll put the 3 rules on the screen for you guys to see. Rule number 1, I cannot trade for any All-Stars. No All-Stars whatsoever. Rule number 2, I cannot trade for a player that has made an All-NBA team, not first team, not second team, not third team. And the final rule, I've given myself a spending limit. I can trade for guys that are on minimum contracts. I can trade for guys that make $20 million. If they're making $21 million, cannot include them in this exercise for the podcast today. But hope you guys do enjoy today's episode. Let's get straight into it. The first team we're going to start with is the Atlanta Hawks. We're going to go in alphabetical order for this exercise. Now, the Hawks are probably happy with where they're sitting at right now in the Eastern Conference. Since Trae Young has come back, they have struggled to win basketball games, and I could see the Hawks being very active at the trade deadline. Now, like I mentioned at the top of this video, can't trade for all-stars, can't trade for all NBA players, so that does eliminate Trae Young from this exercise. But there are a couple other players on their roster that you could look at. You could look at a Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You could look at Ironeko Okongwu. You could look at a Luke Kennard, but that's not the player that I picked in this exercise. The player I picked is a very under-the-radar player that I think could really help this team. It's Vit Krejci. Now, you're probably asking yourself, who is Vit Krejci? Vit Krejci is a 6'8 combo guard for the Atlanta Hawks. He was initially a draftee of the Oklahoma City Thunder, believe it or not, but he's been with the Hawks ever since then for the last couple of seasons. And the one thing I really like about Vit Krejci is his ability to shoot the ball. He's been shooting 40% from 3 over the past 3 seasons, this season included. And right now with the Pistons, I think we can all agree that we're looking for more three-point specialists. This is a guy that can not only, hit three-point shots at a pretty consistent rate, but he can also play make. Right now, Atlanta does have him kind of playing in a point guard role, but he has shown the ability to play off ball as well. I think trading for a guy that's on a salary like this can be challenging. It can, because you look at his contract, he's not making a whole lot, but he does kind of fit into this young core. He's only 25 years old. But for me, when I'm looking at the Atlanta Hawks, Vit Krejci makes a whole lot of sense if you're the Detroit Pistons, if you're looking to address the playmaking and the three-point shooting. The next team we're going to be looking at is the Boston Celtics. Now, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Anthony Simons, respectively, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have been All-Stars and All-NBA, and also their contracts are $50 million. Derek White is making $27 million. Anthony Simons is on an expiring $27 million deal. So they don't really fit into the equation of this exercise. But there is one player that does, and it's Sam Hauser. The one thing I like about Sam Hauser is he's a forward. He's been playing in between small forward and power forward with his time with the Celtics, more power forward as of late. And the thing I like about him is his ability to shoot the ball. Now, obviously, this year he has kind of had a little bit of a slump. He's not shooting up to his career averages. He's usually around a 45% shooter. He's not shooting that this season. He's usually around a 40% three-point shooter throughout his career. Right now it's around 37%. So he is struggling a little bit, but he is still shooting around 37%, which is pretty good. And the other thing I do really like about Sam Hauser is the contract that does come with him. You look at his deal, it's a $10 million deal. It goes up to $12 million, but that's a very cheap contract, probably one of the better contracts in the league for the production that you're getting. So if I'm a Pistons fan and I'm looking at the Celtics, Sam Hauser is a very under-the-radar type of player that you could try to target at this deadline. The team up next is the Brooklyn Nets, and by far the most challenging team I've looked at just looking at their books. automatically Michael Porter Jr. and Nick Claxton would be eliminated from this exercise because they make more than $20 million annually. But as you kind of go down, you see Terrence Mann, he's making $15 million a year, giving you about 8 points. But I don't really think the Pistons are really looking for a player like Terrence Mann right now. You look at a lot of their rookies that I particularly like. I like Danny Wolf. I like Drake Powell. I think Igor Demon's going to be a really good player. Ben Seraf, like really good defensive player. But I don't really think the Pistons are looking for more young talent, more players to develop. And I think it came down to 2 players for me in particular that I had to decide on. It was Noah Clowney and Cameron Thomas. And I think the Pistons would like a Cam Thomas in a trade target. And let me explain why. I think they would go into the mindset of acquiring his skill, which is just making shots. He's been a 20-point-per-game scorer his last 3 seasons. This season included. He's a 15-point-per-game career average score. And I know there's going to be fans saying, like, he doesn't play defense. You know what? None of these players are perfect. You are acquiring Cam Thomas to play off your bench and be a 6-man type of player. Right now, that's Jaden Ivey, but I don't expect Jaden Ivey to be off your bench. I think he'll be starting at some point. So the idea with Cameron Thomas and my thought process behind it would be this. He's a guy that you know that can score in bunches. He's a guy that could lead your second unit in scoring. And I think the Pistons would like the idea of just trading for him as a rental. I don't really know what his asking price would be. I think he's damaged goods with Brooklyn at this point because they basically told him, we don't think you're worth the extension that you're asking for. And if you're the Pistons, this would just be a rental and a tryout basically for Cam Thomas to see if he can find a new home. But he's a player that I think would fit really nicely off this bench. He's a player that maybe you have out there with Cade Cunningham if the game does get close and you're looking for a shot maker, a guy that can shoot threes, a guy that can put it on the floor and get to the basket and the free throw line. But he's the player from the Brooklyn Nets that I would target. The Charlotte Hornets are up next. Now, I was fully prepared, you guys, to select Grant Williams. I forgot that he tore his ACL and he hasn't played a single minute yet. If he was fully healthy, he'd be my pick. So I had to go with someone else. And the player I chose was Josh Green. I think why Josh Green is intriguing for me is a couple of reasons. One, I like his ability to put the ball on the floor and slash. He's not just a player that can, shoot a pretty good volume from 3 and a good percentage. He can also put the ball on the floor. And speaking of his 3-point shooting, last year in an extended role with the Hornets next to LaMelo Ball, he shot 39% from 3. This season, in only 15 minutes a game off the bench for the Hornets so far, shooting 41% from 3. So he has shown the ability to make 3-point shots, and I think that's something that we can all agree that this team is missing big time is 3-point shooting. Now, obviously, I know the shooting guard room is very stacked and very full, so you'd probably have to move on from one of your bench pieces, but I think a change of scenery would do Josh Green some good to get some minutes. And, the kid can defend a little bit, so I think it would be a pretty good fit if you are the Pistons, if you're looking for more 3-point shooting and a slasher. Chicago Bulls are up next. Now, they're a team where they have a lot of guys that kind of fit into the threshold that we're trying to target. And one guy that I've mentioned on the podcast before that I think would just be a very good fit is Coby White. Now, he's on a last year of his deal. He's very similar to Cam Thomas in the aspect of they're on the last year of a deal. They're probably not going to re-sign with the team that they're currently on, and this would be a rental. But I think where I could talk myself into Coby White is the ability for him to either play next to Cade and spurt or come off the bench as a 6-man. It's a guy that's averaging 19 points per game this year, averaged 20 last year. And I've seen firsthand when this guy is hot from 3, it feels like the rim's 10 feet wide. Just his ability to shoot threes, his ability to put the ball on the floor, pass. Obviously, I think as a Piston fan, you probably don't like the defense because it's not consistent. There will be plays where he does lock in, but there are plays where he's just not completely focused. But, you can't really deny just the bucket that he is, and I think it would definitely give this team a whole different dynamic of having a go-to scorer, whether you need him out there in a crunch time lineup or coming off your bench as a 6-man, just flamethrower. As we look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, they're a second apron team. Obviously, they're not winning as many basketball games as they probably want to. And the player I'm going to pick for the Detroit Pistons to target is Sam Merrill. Now, you're probably going to be looking at his stats. Nothing really impressive until this year. He has had an extended role being kind of like the guy, the three-point shooter that Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland and Evan Mobley look to pass to. If you look at his numbers, he's shooting over 40% from 3 on 8 attempts a game. That's like Malik Beasley territory, 13 points a game this year. Just signed a contract this past summer with the Cavs, so he's locked up until he's 33 years old. Now, I think it would be really hard for the Cavs to move on from Sam Merrill, but they are a second apron team. They're not winning as many games as they probably want, and they kind of stay on this trajectory of being like an 8 seed play-in team. It wouldn't surprise me if they do make moves to kind of reconstruct their roster and try to get out of the second apron. As we go to our next team, the Dallas Mavericks, there's a lot of players that we can pick from Klay Thompson, Daniel Gafford, Najee Marshall, PJ Washington. But the one player that I'm picking is a little bit on the younger side. He's 22 years old, went to Michigan State, Max Christie. Now, the reason why I particularly wanted to trade for a guy like a Max Christie is he could shoot the ball. He's having a career from 3 on 5 attempts a game, so it's not really a small sample size. Shooting over 40% from 3 in the NBA is a difficult thing to do, and he's doing it on pretty decent volume. Not to mention, he's a pretty good defender as well. I remember especially when they made the AD for Luka Doncic trade, Max Christie was included in that trade from the Lakers. And he's a pretty good defender for what you're getting. And especially with the contract that he's on, I think the contract is a good value contract because you're banking on this kid to keep developing, and he's only 22. So I think there's more there for him to keep developing, and I think we've seen JB Bickerstaff get the most out of his guys, and I would be really intrigued to have him, off the bench for the Detroit Pistons as a trade target. The team up next is the Denver Nuggets. Now, when we talk about Denver, it's obviously Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon. They traded for Cam Johnson this past summer, sending Michael Porter Jr. to Brooklyn. But as we go down their roster, looking at players, I had to bring back a former Piston, and it's Tim Hardaway Jr., and I'll explain why I picked THJ. I'm still very puzzled why he wasn't offered at least a contract this past summer by the Pistons front office, but after listening to podcasts throughout the year, it sounded like they wanted to give more guys opportunities in Jaden Ivey and Marcus Sasser, and I understand that, but I think when we look at this team, and you even saw it last night against Chicago, like when you don't have perimeter spacing or floor spacing out there, it's very difficult to win basketball games. There'll be nights where you can live in the paint, where you can score 60 to 70 points, but once we get to the playoffs, it becomes a half-court game, and you really have to execute your half-court sets. And I think THJ makes so much sense for the Detroit Pistons if they do want to target him from Denver. He's a guy that's very familiar with this team, who was a big part of the success they had last year, tripling their win total. And I was looking at his stats, and I know he's a good three-point shooter, but this surprised me when I was reading it. He's shooting a career high from 3. Now, we know he's a good three-point shooter. He's shooting 41% from 3 in Denver. Now, I understand playing with Jokic and Murray, his looks are probably like at an all-time high. Like there's probably no one around him, just with the playmaking that Jokic has, the playmaking that Murray has, even Aaron Gordon to an extent. But I think THJ makes a whole lot of sense for being the veteran presence that we know that he is, being familiar with JB Bickerstaff in the Pistons locker room, and his three-point shooting that I think could help, whether it's on the bench, whether you want to have him in the starting lineup or a closing lineup. I think THJ does make a whole lot of sense for the Pistons. Team up next is the Golden State Warriors. Now, obviously, when you talk about Golden State, you're talking about Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Jimmy Butler, Jonathan Kuminga. But as you kind of go down their roster, look at cheaper deals, cheaper contracts, you have guys like Al Horford, Buddy Hield, Gary Payton, DeAnthony Melton. But one player that really intrigues me as a target for the Pistons is former teammate of Cade Cunningham in high school, Moses Moody. That's right, they did play high school basketball together. They were teammates there. The reason why I like Moses Moody as a trade target for the Pistons is a few reasons, and I'll explain why. Number one reason why I think Moses Moody would be a good addition to this team if you're able to trade for him is the contract. And he recently re-signed with the Golden State Warriors, and it's under a mid-level exception, which I think is a good value contract. And you'll have it until 2028 when he is a free agent. I think the second thing when I'm looking at Moses Moody, especially this season, he's had an extended role under Steve Kerr in Golden State, putting up 10 points a game, which is actually a career high for him, believe it or not. Shooting 37% for three and almost 6 attempts a game. Now, when we talk about the Pistons and their current needs, perimeter shooting. Now, 37% from three is still pretty good volume on 6 attempts a game. I think him coming off your bench could definitely, give you a little bit more spark, more perimeter shooting. And, he's been known to play some pretty solid defense too. So I think Moses Moody could be a very under-the-radar target if you are the Pistons. The team up next is the Houston Rockets. Now, when you talk about them as a team, obviously you're going to be mentioning Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun, Amen Thompson, Steven Adams, Jabari Smith Jr. But as we kind of go down this roster and looking at their salary cap, there's one player in particular that I think is that's a Detroit Piston through and through. He plays both ends of the floor extremely hard, and I think the fans would absolutely love him. He's a 6'8" power forward. It's Tari Eason. Now, I've been a very big fan of Tari Eason for several years. This year with the Rockets in 17 games played, 5 games started, shooting 50% from three. That's obviously going to come back down to earth eventually. He's a career 32, 33% three-point shooter. But the reason why I like Tari Eason for the Pistons is a couple of reasons. I think reason number one is when we're talking about power forward on this team, I feel like it's such a talking point with Pistons fans, and deservedly so. Obviously, Tobias Harris is just not the same player as he was last year. He's having so many injuries that he just has never had throughout his career, and his age is catching up with him, and he's on the last year of a deal. Tari Eason, to me, makes sense for the Pistons for the fact that he's going to play both ends of the floor extremely hard. He's shown the ability to make three-point shots. Obviously, we know he's not going to be shooting 50% from three. But a guy like that, I think, is very under the radar. And also, it's worth noting, Houston's forward depth is very deep. From Jabari Smith Jr., they signed Dorian Finney-Smith, who I think is going to get really big minutes, get a bulk of their minutes because he's a veteran, he's battle-tested, and they're going to be relying on him heavily in the playoffs. And then Josh Okogie as well has really cemented himself in the rotation with Udoka over there in Houston. So I think Houston might be willing to trade Tari Eason if a deal is right for them. But if I'm the Pistons, I think he could be a very under-the-radar trade target at this deadline. The Indiana Pacers are up next. It's a real shame what happened to Tyrese Halliburton during the NBA Finals. They have not won as many games as I'm sure they want to. They're going to be lottery bound this year, and they actually have their draft pick. They could come out of the NBA draft with a H.A. DiVincenzo. Wouldn't that be something? But the player I'm going to target in this one from the Pacers is Obi Toppin. Now, I want to say the reason why I would pick Obi Toppin is because he's expected to come back sometime in February. And I made a reasoning why I wasn't going to select Grant Williams because he was injured. But the main difference is Grant Williams tore his ACL. Obi Toppin hurt his foot, had surgery on it, and he's scheduled to come back this season. And I think when we talk about power forward, kind of like Tari Eason, like the Pistons obviously want to upgrade the power forward position. And I've always really been a fan of Obi Toppin. He's shown the ability to hit open three-point shots. He's shown the ability to be a lob threat. I think he makes a whole lot of sense for this team now. Is he starting at the power forward spot? I'm not entirely sure. Could he come off the bench? Absolutely. I think for the Pistons, he kind of fits under like what you're looking for He's on a $14 million contract that goes up to 15 and then 16, and then he's a free agent in 2028, 29. So the contract isn't too bad. You're getting production. He's shown the ability to score and be productive. That's why I would have Obi Toppin from the Pacers. I fully wanted to try to target Aaron Nesmith, if I'm being completely honest, but he extended and he can't be traded until April of 2026. Aaron Nesmith would just check every box that the Pistons are looking for, a guy that is shooting really high volume from three. But I'll settle for Obi Toppin in this situation. The team up next is the LA Clippers. Now, they do have quite a few players that kind of fit under the $20 million range. We're trying to stay under, from Zubac, which I don't even know how they got that deal done. But hey, it's the Clippers. Maybe aspirations had something to do with that. If you get the inside joke, you get the inside joke. Shout out to Pablo Torre. But there are players like Derrick Jones Jr., Chris Dunn. But the one player that I really like for the Pistons is Bogdanovic. Let me explain why. This is a guy that can just flat out shoot the basketball. He was a draft and stash player from the Sacramento Kings. Got traded to the Atlanta Hawks, where he saw his best year from three, almost shot 44%. Last year with the Clips, shot 42% from three, and he's a career 38% three-point shooter. So I think when we talk about the Pistons right now, we're talking about just having more of a three-point threat outside of Duncan Robinson. And I think getting a guy like a Bogdanovic does make sense. Contract-wise, he's on a deal for $16 million. Then he has a club option next season. So if it doesn't work out, you're not really attached to him long-term. So there's no long-term commitment with him. So you're just trading for him to see if he can really elevate your team, whether he's coming off the bench or whether you have him out there next to Cade Cunningham in clutch situations or crunch time situations where you do need a big-time three-point basket. I think it's a low risk, high reward type of situation if you're the Pistons looking to address a three-point shooter and Bogdanovic that might get more opportunity here in Detroit. The Los Angeles Lakers are up next. Surprise, surprise, you guys. We are not trading for LeBron and we're not trading for Luka Doncic. They make too much money, but there are some players on their roster that do make sense for the Detroit Pistons. And one player in particular that I know you guys have actually had your eye on long before he played for the Lakers. He's a power forward. It's Rui Hachimura. Now, a lot of you guys mentioned Rui Hachimura to me when he was in Washington. You thought that he could be a piece that could have grown with this young core when they were in the rebuild under Dwayne Casey and Troy Weaver during that era. But he is with the Lakers. He's on the last year of an $18 million deal. And I think the reason why Rui could make sense for the Detroit Pistons is this. They're looking for power forwards. They're looking for more front court depth. If you do ask me personally, I think Rui does check a lot of boxes for the Detroit Pistons. He checks the box of being a power forward, one, but being able to hit three-point shots I think is very crucial. He's shown the ability to hit threes at a pretty decent clip, 38% as a career three-point shooter. Now, the $18 million expiring contract I think might be appealing to a lot of teams, especially the Pistons, because if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But if it does work out and you want to bring him back, he's only 27 years old, so he can kind of still grow with this young core with Cade Cunningham, Asar Thompson, and Jalen Duren. And I've always liked Rui, even when he was in Washington. I think for the Lakers, though, where it could get a little bit tricky is, their team is very expensive, and I don't really know what the asking price for him would be. I'm sure it's not as expensive as it would be for like an Austin Reeves or, anyone that they value in the long-term future. But if you're the Pistons, Rui could be an under-the-radar pickup that if you're trying to upgrade your front court and get better. Before we get to the Memphis Grizzlies, I did want to spend a minute to talk to you guys about Coach of the Year. Now, we're in January as we're recording this podcast, and we still have about 3 months of regular season basketball, but surprise, surprise, JB Bickerstaff is actually the odds-on favorite to win Coach of the Year over on FanDuel right now. Right behind him is Mitch Johnson and then Mark Daigneault. I felt last year that JB Bickerstaff should have been Coach of the Year just for what he did, tripling the Detroit Pistons win total. The Pistons right now are sitting at 25 wins and the number one seed in the Eastern Conference. So I think this could be a year where JB Bickerstaff gets more first place votes and he could bring Coach of the Year to Detroit. Let me know what you guys think of that over on FanDuel, if you think that J.B. Bickerstaff could win Coach of the Year. As we look at the Memphis Grizzlies, there's really not a lot of players that I particularly like on their roster. Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. obviously make too much money. This is a guy I talked about this past summer because he was a free agent and the Pistons were reportedly linked to him. It's Santi Aldama. Now, Santi Aldama is a power forward. He does come off the bench for the Memphis Grizzlies as a backup forward. But I honestly still like him as a player. He's under contract for the next couple of seasons, and the contract isn't anything crazy. He's making $18 million this year, but the client's is $17 million. And pretty soon that's probably going to be the mid-level exception, the way the salary cap is going up. But I've always really liked Santi Aldama from afar. He's a stretch big that can shoot 35% from three, a rebound. And, he's not a traffic cone defensively. Memphis just has a lot of players where I look at them and I was like, they're probably not going to trade him. He's on such a cheap deal, it'd probably be hard to trade for him in any type of situation. Santi kind of is in the middle of where he makes enough money where it can be traded, but it's not so much where it's unbearable and you can't move him as a plus asset. So when I look at Memphis, he does make the most sense for the Detroit Pistons. We're at the halfway mark, you guys. Only 14 more teams to go. The team up next is the Miami Heat. Now, Miami, when you look at their books, obviously you're talking about Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Terry Rozier, which is absolutely criminal. He's still on their books. Andrew Wiggins, Norm Powell. But the one player that I'm going to pick might kind of go under the radar, might be kind of just an absolutely sicko pick by me. It's Pelle Larsson. He's a second-year player in the NBA, and he's doubled his scoring total from last year. He was around 4.5 points. Now he's at 9.5 points. And he's kind of just like a do-it-all glue guy for the Miami Heat right now. He can rebound. He can defend. He can shoot the ball, shooting around 34% from three, 33% from three. Obviously, we'd like to see that three-point percentage go up, but I think he's just kind of like a do-it-all type of player that the Pistons could possibly trade for. Would be a very sneaky under-the-radar trade as well. Obviously, looking at Miami, they just have a lot of guys that I think when you're talking contractably, you would really have to sell myself on them, outside of this year and give a long-term future. And then it kind of gets to a point where it's just like, do you really want to give up that many assets to get a guy that's on a $25-30 million contract? So that's why I did select Pelle Larsson. I think it would be pretty difficult, though, to try to trade for him just for the fact that he's still on a rookie scale contract, and he will be for the next couple of seasons. But the Pistons also have players that are still on rookie scale contracts, so maybe you can make something work out there. I've always really liked his game, admired it from afar, but he's my pick from the Miami Heat. We're heading back to the Central Division. This time it's the Milwaukee Bucks. Looking at their team, sorry you guys, we're not trading for Giannis, but Milwaukee does have some three-point specialists that I think the Detroit Pistons could 100% target at this deadline. The player that I'm going to be focusing on is Gary Trent Jr. Now, I've been a fan of his since his Portland and his Toronto days. Always been a big fan. Thought the Pistons were actually going to sign him in free agency a couple seasons ago, but they elected to go with Malik Beasley instead. No regrets there. Set a franchise record. But getting back to Trent, the reason why I think he would be a good fit for the Detroit Pistons is just the consistency with him. He's been a career 39% three-point shooter, and that's great. Last year he shot 41%. This year he's around 37%. Now, obviously, I think his contract, $3 million, that's going to be a little bit difficult to trade for, but I think the Pistons can 100% do it. And I've said multiple post-game podcasts, I think you have to address more perimeter shooting. Duncan Robinson cannot be your only three-point shooter to bail you out night in and night out. As of late, we have seen players like Marcus Sasser and Dennis Jenkins step up from the outside. But I think adding another three-point specialist like a Gary Trent could make a whole lot of sense for the Pistons. Not to mention, this guy isn't a traffic cone on defense. He will try out on the perimeter. Not saying he's locked down by any means, but he's at least passable on the defensive end of the floor. So that's why I decided to choose Gary Trent from Milwaukee in this one. We're going to be looking at the Minnesota Timberwolves next. Now, I've mentioned this player as a trade target on multiple post-game podcasts for the last month or so. Now it's starting to get traction, and everyone's talking about him. It's Donte DiVincenzo. Now, the reason why I mentioned him over a month ago is because I think when I look at the Detroit Pistons and how they can get better, it's more scoring. And the way that Donte can score, I think you like as a Piston fan. He can score at all three levels. He's a career 37, almost 38% three-point shooter. You can put him in the starting lineup if need be, off the bench, closing lineups. And I think a lot of Pistons fans would like him. Now, I understand that there was a little bit of altercations last year, we'll call it, between Ron Holland and Donte. Just caused like a huge fight, multiple ejections. But Ron had, altercations with Duncan Robinson, and they squashed the beef. They were cool. I think if the Pistons were to trade for a Donte DiVincenzo, I don't really think there would be any beef there. I think at the end of the day, these guys were just competing with each other, and both of them didn't want to give up any ground. But I think Donte, to me, makes a whole lot of sense contractually as well. He'll be under contract until he's 31 years old, where he's a UFA in 2027, 28. And getting a caliber of player and a three-point shooter that he is, I think could make a whole lot of sense for the Detroit Pistons. The team up next is the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, I know we've talked about Trey Murphy on this podcast in previous episodes, previous live streams, but he is on a contract that's $25 million. It goes away from what we're trying to follow, staying under $20 million. And I do think there are other players on the Pelicans roster that do make sense. And one player in particular that has been getting a lot of national attention from the Los Angeles Lakers, it's Herb Jones. Now, why do I think Herb Jones makes sense with the Detroit Pistons when they have wings like Asar Thompson, Ryan Holland, and Javonte Green? I think there's room for a player like a Herb Jones that can play in between a small forward and a power forward. He has developed his three-point shot quite a bit. Worked with assistant coach Fred Vincent, who is now on the Detroit Pistons coaching staff. And he's a Trajan Langdon former draft pick as well. So Trajan Langdon is very familiar with what Herb Jones is capable of. And this guy is just a monster defensively. There's a reason why he's been linked to so many Los Angeles Lakers trade rumors, and other teams around the league have really coveted a Herb Jones. And I think it makes sense when you look at his contract. Now, he did just extend. He will be under contract until 2030, but his current contract is very budget friendly. If you're a team like the Detroit Pistons, I think he's definitely gettable, kind of considering the state in which New Orleans is in. They are not a playoff team. They're still kind of a bottom feeder in the Western Conference, and they don't have their draft pick. So this could be a guy that could really elevate this team. Maybe he could be a Tobias Harris replacement. You have him at the 4 in your starting lineup, but he's been a player that I think could make a whole lot of sense for the Detroit Pistons. The team up next, the New York Knicks, the team the Pistons have beaten this year. Now, when you look at their team, and I'm looking at three-point shooting, they have a couple of three-point shooters to choose from. Deuce McBride, Jordan Clarkson. But the player I went with is someone that didn't play in the first matchup between the Pistons and Knicks. It's Landry Shamet. Now, the reason why I chose Landry Shamet is I think he's one of those players that I think the Knicks would trade, not only to the Detroit Pistons, but to any team looking to acquire more perimeter shooting, and I think he does that. He's been just a very solid pro throughout his career. Saw him in the playoffs. He does try defensively. I think if you're the Pistons and you're looking to acquire another three-point shooter for your bench on the cheap, I think Landry does make a whole lot of sense. Obviously, there are other players that did kind of cross my mind. Like, I'd love a Deuce McBride, but it seems like the Knicks are very high on him. It would take a big offer, I think, to get Deuce McBride on the Detroit Pistons. Jordan Clarkson was a big free agent acquisition for them as well. I think Landry Shamet could be the odd man out, and the Pistons could pry him away from the New York Knicks. So that's why I picked him as a trade target in this one. We're looking at the defending NBA champions next, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, OKC has so many guys that are so versatile defensively, but I'm looking at one of their three-point snipers in Isaiah Joe. The marketing itself would sell multiple tickets. Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, right? All jokes aside, this guy's a three-point sniper. He shot 40% from three his past couple of seasons on pretty good volume. And the guy can defend a little bit. I really like him. He's only 26 years old right now. You'll have him under contract for the next couple of seasons under a mid-level exception. Now, it just depends what OKC and Sam Presti would want for Isaiah Joe. But just as a trade target, he would be very high on the top of my list. Other players that did cross my mind was Cason Wallace. I think Cason Wallace makes a whole lot of sense. OKC's going to have to make a decision on him as well, what they're going to do with him in the long-term future. But if we're just looking to address more three-point shooting and getting better in that aspect, in that area, I think Isaiah Joe makes the most logical sense. I said earlier in the podcast that the Brooklyn Nets were the most challenging team to find a trade target for in this podcast. Until the Orlando Magic came, they said, hold my beer. Orlando is challenging for a lot of different reasons, and the reasons why they're more challenging to find a trade target for is not that they don't have players that I think would be attractive in trades. It's once you get below the threshold of $10 million, the players, it's like Anthony Black, they're not trading ever since Jalen Suggs went down. He's been playing out of his mind. He's been playing like a point guard that they might look to possibly give more minutes consistently. He's been playing fantastic. Then you look at Tyus Jones, who's completely fallen off a cliff, and I feel pretty confidently in what we have in Dennis Jenkins right now. I probably would take Dennis Jenkins over Tyus Jones in 2026. That's just me. Then you have Goga Batadze, who is a center, which I feel that like our center crop right now between Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, and Paul Reed is pretty strong. I don't really think that's a weakness of our team particularly. And then there's other players, younger players like a Jace Richardson, who's a rookie from this year's draft class. He's probably Orlando's best shooter, but it's about a really small sample size. He's almost shooting close to 40%. Then you have Jet Howard from a couple of years ago. He's an intriguing piece that they do play quite often. And the player that I ended up choosing, and I just want to tell you guys, like, the thing with trying to find a trade target under this price point is challenging because, like, the players that you think that you want make more money than $20 million. So the player I chose, without wasting your guys' time, is Tristan da Silva. And the reason why I picked Tristan da Silva is Orlando is a piss-poor three-point shooting team. They've been a very bad three-point shooting team for several years. That's why they traded for Desmond Bane. Tristan da Silva isn't shooting 40%. He's shooting 36.5% from three. But he would make sense for the Pistons because he's versatile. He can defend. He's an older prospect, but this was really challenging, you guys. Maybe you can look at Orlando's roster and you can, stay under that $20 million price point. Maybe there's someone I missed that you think that could be a viable option. I think Tristan da Silva makes the most sense. The Philadelphia 76ers are up next. Now, we all know Paul George, Joel Embiid are their top paid players on their roster. But as you go down their cap sheet and you look at some of the players under that threshold, Kelly Oubre Jr., who I've always been a really big fan of, one-time Piston Quentin Grimes. When I say one-time Piston, I think the man played maybe 5 games. Trajan traded him within like his first move here, so I doubt he would bring back a Quentin Grimes. But there's a power forward on this roster that has my interest. It's Trent Watford. He's pretty young. I think he's only 25 years old right now. He stepped up pretty big for the 76ers early on in the season when Joel Embiid and Paul George were out with the injury. got a triple-double while they were out with injury. Triple-doubles don't really mean anything, but this is a forward that can score, shooting 39% from 3 on 1.2 attempts per game. Also can pass it a little bit and rebound. I think he's just kind of an under-the-radar type of power forward that the Pistons could target. Now, is this a starting quality power forward? Probably not. This would be more of like a backup power forward. I still think when we look at our roster, that's one big glaring hole. We all know Tobias Harris is on this team last year of a deal, but I don't really think we can confidently say we know who our power forward is going to be for the next 3 to 4 years. I confidently can't. Now, whether Trajan in the front office thinks that's Isaiah Stewart, that is yet to be determined. But I think Trent Watford could be worth looking at on the cheap because he's on a pretty decent deal. The Phoenix Suns are up next. Sorry, you guys, we're not trading for Devin Booker, but there are some players that I think the Pistons could possibly target that are on cheaper deals. Now, 2 players in particular that caught my interest was one, Royce O'Neal, an undrafted forward. He plays small forward, shooting a pretty good volume from 3, shooting 40% this year. And the second player is someone that I've mentioned on previous podcasts. It's Grayson Allen. Now, I ended up picking Grayson Allen over Royce O'Neal just because the volume in which he shoots from 3, I think is on par with what Malik Beasley was doing last year. Not saying that he's the same type of three-point specialist as Malik Beasley is, but the volume is about the same and the percentages are almost identical. He's shooting 38% from 3 this year on 8 attempts a game. He shot 41% last year. He's a career 40% three-point shooter. And I know Grayson Allen kind of irks certain fans, even Pistons fans. They don't like the way he plays. They kind of label him as a dirty player. If you don't mind that and you like his three-point shooting, I think he does make a whole lot of sense for the Pistons. Right now, he's on a $16 million deal. That's going to go up next season at $18 million. But I think if you're just looking to upgrade and get another three-point shooter, Grayson Allen does make a whole lot of sense if you are the Detroit Pistons. The team up next is the Portland Trailblazers. Now, I know there's going to be someone saying you should pick Denny Avdia because he's under $20 million. I'm trying to be realistic as possible. I know damn well Denny Avdia's asking price would be insane. The contract he's on, it's an absolute steal. I think Washington probably regrets trading him, kind of the state of where their franchise is in. But the player I'm picking is Matisse Thybulle, and I know there'll probably be some people that are cringing at this because he's only played 4 games this season. He's currently out due to injury, but he is set to come back sometime this month in January. He suffered a UCL sprain in his thumb, had surgery on that, and during that, he had the same type of procedure on his knee as Jaden Ivey, had some cleanup surgery on his knee. Now, with that being said, the reason why I like Matisse Thybulle is the defensive player that he is. He's a pit bull. He's a dog. At the 2-guard position, we don't really have, I would say, a lockdown defender. The reason why I picked him is I'm thinking like having a perimeter defender like Thybulle and Asar out there together would just cause so much chaos and help the Pistons with more transition and running opportunities. Now, Matisse Thybulle has shown the ability to hit threes. Obviously, his percentages look good, but he doesn't attempt a whole lot. But I think the reason why you would try to trade for a guy like him on the salary that he's on the last year of a player option is just for his defensive switchability, his defensive versatility. He's a very good player. But again, it's a risk because the guy hasn't really been healthy throughout his career. Not because he can't stay healthy. It's just this guy plays so damn hard. The Kings, the Sacramento Kings are up next. They are having a miserable season. Who would have thought trying to have Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan and Russell Westbrook all on one team together. But the player that I'm going to be looking at on their roster that fits under the threshold that we're following is Malik Monk. If you guys remember, there was a lot of rumors this past summer about the Pistons being interested in Malik Monk and what he could provide. Now, I think we can all agree that him as a player off your bench does add a lot of value. One, for his shot-making ability, and two, for his playmaking. Now, he's on a deal that I think is pretty favorable. He's locked up for the next couple of seasons, and I think he does make a whole lot of sense for the Pistons if they do want to look to have a go-to guy off the bench that can score in bunches, or if you need someone out there in crunch time next to Cade Cunningham and Jalen Duren and those boys out there. If the game's down to 2-3 points, or you need just a go-to bucket, I think Malik Monk does make a whole lot of sense, especially if you have teams that are trapping Cade Cunningham. But he would be my pick in this one. San Antonio Spurs are up next. Now, they're a very intriguing team to me. Much like the Pistons, they're having a lot of success with their franchise player and Victor Wembanyama, and they have kind of surrounded Victor with vets and all-stars in De'Aaron Fox. One player in particular that I looked at right away, and I was like, man, kind of wish the Spurs were doing worse, because maybe they would be willing to move off of him. It's Keldon Johnson. I've always been a really big fan of Keldon Johnson, but I doubt the Spurs move on from him. So I had to think a little bit smaller as I'm going down the roster, looking at some of the guys that are bench pieces and contributors and three-point shooters, by the way. Julian Champagnie. He is a guy that has shot 37% from three. Most recently, he just went berserk against the New York Knicks. Could not miss a shot. He was just in his bag. But I think a player like that, an under-the-radar acquisition like a Julian Champagnie, could make some sense for the Pistons if they're looking for cheap bench scoring and another perimeter three-point shooter. Now, the Toronto Raptors are up next. They're a very expensive team. When you look up at the top, it's Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, Ilka Pirtle, Brandon Ingram. So as we go down to the cheaper contracts, there are two players in particular that caught my attention. First and foremost, Jacoby Walter. I've always really been a fan of his. I think he's going to be a really good player. I'm not really sure what Toronto would actually want for him. He's a guard that can shoot, but his minutes have been very inconsistent in Toronto so far this season. And the other player I really liked that I think could be a kind of a low-key, under-the-radar target is Grady Dick. I'm being 100% serious. I'm not trolling. I know some of you guys think I'm probably trolling mentioning him. When he was playing with the Raptors last year, he was hitting 35% of his threes on 6 attempts a game. Now, his playing time is completely diminished since last year. He does get some playing time. It's just not the starters minutes that he was getting last season. And last year, Toronto was a really bad basketball team, so that's probably why Grady and Jacoby Walter do come off the bench. But I would probably lean towards Grady a little bit more, just because his ability to shoot the three-point shot and put the ball on the floor. And I honestly think, when I watch him play a lot, he gives me a lot of young Kyle Korver vibes when I'm watching him shoot the three-point shot. If the Pistons were able to swing a trade to get him away from Toronto, I think it would be a really big addition to their team. Now, whether you want to have him as a sixth man, or you think he could kind of be a Duncan Robinson replacement, because you don't really know how long Duncan Robinson is going to be here, considering his contract. This year, it's fully guaranteed, but the last couple of years of Robinson's contracts are partially guaranteed. So it'll be interesting to see what the Pistons do with Duncan Robinson. But Grady could be a possible, maybe cheap solution to replace Duncan. Utah is up next. Now, Utah is a team that we all know that's rebuilding. Obviously, the Pistons aren't really interested right now in trading for Lauri Markkanen, and the asking price is just way too high. Danny Ainge wanted the conversation to start with Asar Thompson, and that's just not going to happen. So as we kind of look at Utah's roster, they do have a lot of guys that are on rookie scale contracts, and two players in particular that make sense for the Pistons if they do want to upgrade their three-point shooting are Svi Mykhailiuk, one-time Piston, if you guys remember Svi, and a player that JB Bickerstaff actually coached while he was in Cleveland, Kevin Love. Now, I think it just really depends on what you prefer. If you prefer more of a small forward in Svi Mykhailiuk that shoots a pretty good percentage. He's shooting 39% from three. He's a career 36% shooter from the outside. Or Kevin Love, who has been in the NBA for 18 seasons. He's a veteran, and most of his shots come from the outside. If you're willing to give him a good maybe 10, 15 minutes off your bench as a backup power forward to back up Tobias Harris. I don't really know if the Pistons and Trajan would do that, even though there is a previous relationship with JB Bickerstaff. I think Kevin Love has had a phenomenal career, but I probably wouldn't pick Kevin Love. I would probably lean towards a little bit more towards Svi Mykhailiuk just because he's a little bit younger. I think he's actually developed quite a bit since the last time he was on the Detroit Pistons, and I wouldn't hate having him back if the offer was right. But Svi would probably be my pick for a trade target. Last but not least, the Washington Wizards. I'm going to be 100% honest with you guys. I had to redo this because the player I had initially first was Corey Kispert because he kind of fit into the player exception that the Pistons got during the Dennis Schroeder trade this past summer with the Kings. So I was like, yeah, Corey Kispert makes sense, but he was sent down to Atlanta as part of the Trae Young to the Washington Wizards deal. So my second option for the Detroit Pistons is Keyshawn George. He's a second-year shooting guard, small forward, kind of a tweener type of player, shooting a career high 40% from three, 15 points a game, almost 6 rebounds, 5 assists. He's taken huge steps in development with the Washington Wizards. Now, are the Wizards going to trade him? I'm not entirely sure. I feel like everyone is gettable for the right price. Washington was just a difficult team to look at in terms of like what the Pistons need and what types of players that I think that they might be interested in. I feel like Keyshawn George would probably be pretty high at their list if they were looking for a player from the Washington Wizards roster. But again, they're a rebuilding roster. It's really hard to come up with the trade that makes sense for both sides. Right now, I just kind of question what Washington wants to do, especially trading for Trae Young. You still have Chris Middleton on your books. Alex Sarr is obviously the franchise guy that they're trying to build around. They have Koulibaly, who I don't even know if they would trade. And then everyone else, like, it's here below Koulibaly. You have guys like Cam Whitmore, who I don't really know if the Detroit Pistons would trade for Cam Whitmore, just given you've had back-to-back coaches, Udoka in Houston, and now Keefe in Washington, questioning his effort and questioning his ability to actually lock in on both ends. So that's why I went with Keyshawn George. We've seen him firsthand. Give Cade Cunningham, I don't want to say problems, but at least like guard him pretty thoroughly as best as you can. So I really like him as a player. Again, I really don't know if Washington would actually trade for him, but he would be my target in this situation. But I do want to wrap up this podcast, you guys. This was a lot of fun. This took me about, I want to say 2 weeks. And the reason why it took me so long to make this video is because, as you guys know, we do post-game podcasts throughout the week. And then we do weekend podcasts, usually on Saturday or Sunday, that are a little bit longer. So I've been making this in my spare time, maybe doing like a team or two when I have, maybe an hour at lunch. But I really do appreciate if you guys did listen all the way to the end of this podcast. If you like stuff like this, let me know. This was a lot of fun to make. Obviously, I don't have as much free time during the season as I do during the off season, but we will have podcasts for you guys for the rest of the weekend. We have one on Saturday, obviously the post-game podcast against the LA Clippers after that game's done. And then on Sunday, we're going to have Eric Vincent on the show. Haven't talked to Eric one-on-one in a couple of months. I know I've had him and Sean on together, but just going to have Eric on this Sunday, talk about the Pistons, talk about some stuff he's actually tweeted about as of late. Definitely want to get his reaction to some stuff I don't want to spoil it because I think it'll be a fun podcast for you guys, but I appreciate all you guys that have watched this little trade target podcast / video that we put out today. As always, you guys, I hope you're staying safe. Take care. And as always, go Pistons. Peace.